Hello, I'm Jorge Gestoso. Welcome to a new program. On today's show, the Green New Deal. Our guest, Javier Sierra, spokesperson from the Sierra Club, the largest environmental organization in the U.S. Javier Sierra, a warm welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Javier, how ambitious is this Green New Deal?
Well, it is very ambitious. It's very ambitious because we have a huge problem in front of us. We have probably the largest, the biggest challenge that humanity has ever faced is the climate crisis. So to solve and to tackle this problem, we need to be bold. We need to be brave, and we need to put forward really ambitious proposals like this one in this case. But then again, what we're confronting here right now is something that your generation, my generation, is the last one that can do something really significant in terms of tackling the climate crisis. And to do that, we need to have the entire society involved in this fight. And this comes from the social point of view, the economic point of view, and practically the entire society needs to be involved in this fight. So yes, it is a very ambitious proposal, but then again, we have a huge problem.
The plan has two areas, fighting against climate change and also economic, also, if you want, challenges. In terms of the environment, they are talking about to reach the goals of the Paris meeting accord, 2030, reduce to make sure that at the end of the 21st century, the temperature doesn't go further than 1.5 degrees.
The UN climate panel just gave us a really stern warning. But late last year, they told us that we have only until 2030 to reduce by at least 45% the climate change emissions, the fossil fuel emissions. And then by 2050, they had to be completely eliminated.
And 2030 is around the corner.
2030 is just 11 and a half years from now. So yes, we have very little time. So that's why I was saying before, we have a huge problem, so we need to have a really big solution. On the other hand, also from this climate denying organization, administration, the Trump administration, also late last year, they released the National Climate Assessment, which is mandatory by the Congress of the United States that we do this every year. The conclusion of this thing is if we continue on this path, if we don't drastically reduce our climate change emissions, by the year 2040, 2050, we are going to be in a very dystopian world. There's going to be huge areas of the United States that will be uninhabitable. Many of them will not be practical for agriculture. Many of them will be abandoned. Also the rise of the sea level will be practically half of the Florida Peninsula will be submerged. Vast areas that are right next to the Gulf of Mexico will go the same way. The Chesapeake Bay, which is our neighbor right here, it takes 1 hour to get there on a car. By the time this thing happens, it's going to be just a lapping on the doors of the White House. So yes, we have a really big problem. So we need to have a really big solution.
Green New Deal also is talking about trying to fight what they call it economic disparity. And they say that minorities are the ones who suffer the most if you want all these consequences. So they're thinking that the whole thing could create millions of jobs. But on the other hand, you and I live here in Washington, and we see that this is a proposal done by two Democrats. We're talking about the youngest Congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and a senator.
Senator Markey, yeah.
Most definitely, the Republicans, the argument that they're talking about with more frequency is there's no money for this.
Well, let me answer first what you said about pollution. What we're fighting here is not only, which is a huge, of course, objective that we have in here, is to fight for the future of humanity, no less. It's also that we're fighting pollution. For us, what is called in English the frontline communities, millions of Latinos here in the United States are bombarded every day, every single day, with toxic pollution coming from the burning of oil, coal, gas, and so forth. You see, so it's not only that we're fighting for a clean future. We're talking about fighting disease like asthma, respiratory diseases, coronary diseases, cancer, premature deaths that really impact our community. Then when they said all this is too expensive, you see, when we're talking about the lives of people who are dying prematurely because of all this pollution, all of a sudden we run out of money. It is really funny, coming especially from an administration that passed this tax cut for the rich, the super rich, and corporations that so far has costed $1.3 trillion added to the deficit in the United States. Not only that, but every single year we give away in subsidies up to $50 billion to the fossil fuel industry, just like that. I mean, we're talking about the oil industry is the richest, most powerful industry in the whole world, and we're still giving them $50 billion. So they start, the pockets start shrinking as soon as we're talking about the whole United States of America, not just a really small minority that already have so much money they don't know what to do with it.
So they say they cannot afford it. And the other side of the coin, the Democrats say, we cannot not to do it because it's even more expensive. Basically, they're saying this is to change the foundations of the country because the people that are proposing this is that we have to act immediately, start to work at full speed in order to change our pattern of living. So is this a revolution?
It is industrial revolution. It's the second industrial revolution what we need here, but it's also an insurance policy what we're buying here, you see? Because we're investing money into this thing just to avoid what I was saying before, that what economy can afford $400 billion every year in losses, just losses because of climate change? What economy can put up with the loss in real estate properties because of the sea level rise? And we're talking about $1.3 trillion that's going to happen, you see? And that's the money of the middle class. What we invest in our little house or our big house or whatever, that is not going to be there anymore. So what we're buying here is an insurance policy to avoid the worst consequences, the most catastrophic consequences of climate change.
The Republicans are making of this an absurd proposal because, as you were mentioning, there's no money to finance this. And they say that is a typical leftist, left-right proposal, meaning left is incorrect, is a threat. And we Republicans, we are absolutely against that. So much so that the president has said that is the most absurd thing that he has heard. And he said, I hope that the Democrats are going to continue pushing this in the campaign because suggesting that it's working against them. Question, is this issue, the Green New Deal, going to play a role in the presidential campaign of next year?
Of course it will. Of course it will. And all candidates, they better have a good plan. They better have a good plan how to implement this Green New Deal. They better have good ideas as to how we're going to fight this fight, how we're going to fight climate change. But let's just remember where all this criticism comes from. The Republican Party of the United States is the only party in the democratic world that actually denies the climate science. The President of the United States, who belongs to the Republican Party, is also the only world leader that denies the climate science. Is the one that calls all this a Chinese hoax and so forth. So the credibility in this respect is underground. I mean, there's not only among the 70% of Americans who actually are very much for fighting climate change, but also in front of the entire international community. Jorge, we are the pariahs right now of the international community. Up to maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we were the leaders, the world leaders in the fight against climate change. Now we are the biggest obstacle because of these the 9 politicians that are running the country.
In terms of labor, who will win and who will lose if this plan is implemented?
Everybody will win. That's the big difference between the dirty energy economy that we have right now and the clean energy economy that we are proposing here. I mean, you just go out there and then see it that is in a very clear way. For us Latinos, it will be an incredible boost in terms of income Why? Because the Green New Deal will foster the sectors of the economy that employ the most Latinos, like construction, manufacturing, agriculture, and so forth. So, and these will be good jobs. These jobs that cannot be exported, that will pay a living wage, and then it will bring millions of Latinos up to the middle class. So, once again, what we're talking about here is the good of the many against the selfish interests of the very few.
There's a data that could be interesting, is that 93% of the fuels used by the government is for the military industry. 93% of the gasoline and the fuels that the government burns is done by the military.
Actually, the armed forces of the United States is the biggest polluter in the country, but also the Pentagon, and this is something that the Republican Party hates to hear. The armed forces of the United States consider climate change the biggest threat to national security, not terrorism, not any kind of
not immigration
or anything like that. Climate change is the biggest enemy of the security of the United States. And then, but what we have to also consider here is that being efficient is at the really root of a good armed forces. And being efficient in terms of energy is precisely what the Green New Deal is proposing. So this is going to be like a domino effect, Jorge, and it's actually already happening across the country at the state and local level. The new Green Deal is actually taking place, whether Mr. Trump and his cronies at the White House like it or not. California is the best example. California is the 5th economy in the world, and they already committed themselves to get a 100% clean and renewable energy for the whole state. And it's not only California, it's also Hawaii, New Mexico, the District of Columbia, where we're right now, and most recently Puerto Rico.
And you're talking about 120 cities already?
Yes, this is cities across the country that have already made that commitment. And there are parts of the country that already have met their Paris Accord goals way in advance of they had planned. So what we're seeing here is tremendous progress, tremendous positive effects of the clean energy revolution that we're seeing, regardless of what the federal government is trying to do.
What your organization, the Sierra Club, is doing in order to or promote the Green New Deal, or to combat all the resistance that you find politically? I
think one of the best programs that the Sierra Club is doing right now is called the Ready for 100. Ready for 100 is promoting for localities, municipalities, cities, and states to go 100% clean. And as I said before, it's way more than 100 already. Many more have already made the commitment. That they have not signed the law already, but they're on their way to do that. In terms of states, for instance, New Jersey, New York, the city of New York yesterday committed itself to reducing the use of the energy in their buildings by 70%. This is the biggest city in the United States, all right? And 70% of the pollution coming out of New York comes from their buildings. So this is a big deal, you see. So it's New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Washington State, Oregon. All those places are already way ahead of the federal government in the fight against climate change.
So new jobs in order to put into work the Green New Deal, weathering the buildings, redoing the ecosystems. What else?
Wow, that's a whole lot. A whole lot. We're already trying to change completely the way we extract energy for our daily living, and obviously the clean options are the best. As a matter of fact, right now, clean energy, building clean energy is cheaper than continue using coal-fired plants. It's in many parts of the world right now, clean energy is much cheaper than dirty energy alternatives. So we're seeing the advantages already. And this is not only us, the environmental movement, or 70% of the American people, or the science. No, we're talking about international energy markets. They already have realized that clean energy is better, cheaper, and it has less risk or fewer risks than the dirty energy. In the past 3 years, the past 2.5 years, more clean energy has been installed in the world than dirty energy. And that is a really good piece of news.
We have been talking in previous occasions about the fracking. Very, very harmful for everyone.
It's what we call the extreme extraction of fossil fuels. We already got all the long-laying fruit, so we're going to extremes to get more fossil fuels. And the way it is, they drill these wells and then they inject all these chemicals and all this water and make the rock crack. And when it cracks, when it expands, when it fracks, it releases gas and oil. And what happens here is the pollution that creates, the millions of gallons that are injected into these wells, end up in the water supply of communities surrounding all these wells. It is really sad to see the destruction of our, in many instances of our most special places, seeking these dirty fuels that we no longer need. I mean, if we go, we already have the technology, the know-how, and the money to go clean. The only thing that we're lacking here is the political will to go in that direction.
Yeah, the greed.
The greed, exactly.
And the fact is that you see that eventually this is going to be something that is, in the long term, is going to be implemented, or is going to be implemented, the Green New Deal, a light version, or is going to be given the power of all those lobbyists just buried and I will stay there.
Well, that is the plan. Obviously, we need to deal with this greed and this selfishness, and the way to do it is to explain the overwhelming advantages of clean energy over dirty energy, and the only disadvantages are for those who propose continue the old ways, continue using 19th century technologies and fuels that are not only killing at the atmosphere that we all depend on, it's also killing us physically with all this pollution.
Optimistic?
We are optimistic in the sense that even though we have the only leader in the world that denies the climate science, we are seeing that the rest of the country is swimming in the complete opposite direction, and the progress has been really remarkable. When we're talking about all these states, California and so forth, it makes me feel optimistic. But the fight is hard. These are really powerful and very well-funded enemies that we have in front of us, and but I think it's. We're talking about the vast majority of the human race has already agreed that we need to fight climate change. It's just this little minority that we have to deal with.
Very powerful.
Yeah.
Javier, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jorge.